everyone. Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at hectograph paper versus thermal paper. I'm going to start with the hectograph paper. Okay, this is predominantly used for doing hand-drawn stencils. For those that don't know, I'm just going to give you a really quick demo just to show you what I mean. So let's take this really simple design. Okay, now if I was going to make a hand-drawn stencil from this, what I'd do is I'd place this has just been printed out, on top of the hectograph paper. Take my pencil. I usually use like a softish pencil. This is 5B, I think, yeah. And then I'll just start drawing round. Let's just zoom in a bit there for you, as you can see it. And just start drawing around the outline. And this is the old school way of doing it, you know, hand-drawn stencils. I'll just quickly show you underneath there, and it's starting to give me my stencil. So I'm just going to cut the video while I just go around this quickly, and then just to save some time. Okay, so I've just come to the end of quickly doing that stencil, and that's it underneath. And this will be good, you know, if I prep the skin now, just to stick that straight on, and that'd make a really nice transfer. Now, the other way of doing hand-drawn stencils would be to get some tracing paper. This is what my mentor had me do. And I'd have to trace over top of the original design. So what I'd do is I get my tracing paper, I get a staple, just clip it there to secure it, stop it moving around, and then I'd basically trace over this design. So I'll do that now, just to quickly show you. I'll cut the video whilst I do it. Okay, so that's the design traced onto some tracing paper. So then what I'll do is I'll just cut that off. And then what my mentor used to make me do was take this trace design, okay, so this isn't a stencil at the moment, it's just pencil on tracing paper. Take my hectograph paper and go over it again to make a stencil, just like we did with the paper, to make this print on the back of this. So I'm going to draw this, I'm going to cut the video, and then I'll show you after I've traced around it. Okay, so I've started off by tracing this one over the top, and then I've laid this on the hectograph paper and traced around it again, and that's gave me a print on the back. And again, this stencil's ready to go on the skin now, a hectograph stencil. Now, my mentor had me do this a lot, and the reason behind why he wanted me to do this is because he used to say to me it's muscle memory, you know, because by the time it actually comes to doing the tattoo, it'll be the third time you've actually done the drawing. So obviously I've done it one time tracing the drawing, 2 times going over it on the hectograph paper, and 3rd time on the skin. So he was very set in his ways and adamant that I'd do that every single time. And it's a lot of work involved, but he did have a point, you know, you do get used to the stencil doing that. So they're basically the ways how you'd do a hand-drawn stencil with hectograph paper. And all I do with this then is trim it down close to the design, and if it were going to bend round on a piece of, I'll just get that in focus, if it were going to bend round like on a piece of skin, I'd probably put a few slits in it as well. And that'd be good to go. So there you go, that's hectograph paper. Now, thermal paper, because this stuff usually has 4 sheets to it. You've got the yellow sheet at the backing sheet. Then you've got the actual carbon sheet. You've got this protective layer here, which is sometimes referred to as the onion sheet, and you remove this just in it when you run this through a thermal printer or a dot matrix printer. And then obviously you've got the top sheet here, which your actual stencil is going to go onto the tracing paper sheet. Now, if I wanted to make a stencil with thermal paper, if I had a thermal printer, I'd basically get my design and I'd run the design through the printer with the thermal paper, and I'd get a copy of it. Usually with thermal printers you have to flip the design to make them back to front and then run them through. It's just the way they work. But personally, what I do when I use this, I use a dot matrix printer. The old-fashioned dot matrix printer, you can get them off eBay really cheap, and they do just as good job as the thermal printers. I personally think they do a slightly better job than thermal printers. I have had thermal printers before, and I've always gone back to using my dot matrix just because that's what works for me. Now, if I was to run this design through my through my dot matrix printer, what I do with this, to be honest, I just print this straight out because it's black and white. There's no detail inside it, so I would literally get this on the screen and send it to the dot matrix printer, put this paper in it, and print it out, and that'd be it done. If I had, let's say, something a bit more complicated, let's say a portrait, and I had a photograph of someone, and I ran the photograph through the dot matrix printer, it'd probably come out as just a massive purple mess. So what I'd need to do with that is either apply a Photoshop filter to it. I've actually just put a video up on how to apply a Photoshop filter to make a picture into a stencil. I'll stick a card up on the screen, and if you check that out, follow that link, that'll show you how to apply the Photoshop filter. So you can either do that, or what I do personally, I combine, when I'm making stencils, 90% of the time I combine the two. So let me explain quickly, and then we're going to get into the weighing up the hectograph against the thermal. But I'll just quickly show you what I do personally when I make stencils. So, say this is the design that somebody wants, okay? What I would do, I would put this on the hectograph paper and draw around it, and get this, which I've done. Then I would take this and I'd scan it into my computer, okay? And then I'd have a JPEG picture of this on my computer, and I'd load it into Photoshop. Then from Photoshop, I've got my stencil on Photoshop now. I can resize it, do what I want with it, and I can print it out as many times as I want on my thermal paper. And that's personally how I do stencils. And like I say, I probably do that 90% of the time with all stencils that I do. So let's weigh these two up. Okay, so pros and cons of hectograph, pros and cons of thermal. So the pros of hectograph, they make a very strong stencil on the skin, much stronger than what thermal paper does, in my opinion. Whenever I've used hectograph stencils, like I say, back in the day when I was doing my apprenticeship, probably 80% of the stencils I used were hand-drawn hectograph stencils, and they were very strong on the skin, very clean, very crisp, and they stayed on the skin a lot longer than what thermal does as well. So that's a definite positive for hectograph paper. Another positive for this is you can use it multiple times. I mean, you can probably see on there like some squiggles, some outlines of some stuff that's already been done on the sheet of paper, and nothing stops you from just, you can use these papers, and you can if you've got a free bit down here, you could put your design there and just stencil it there. And one sheet of paper can last quite a long time. You can get quite a lot of stencils out of it before the stencil starts getting really grainy and stuff like that, and you need to change the sheet. So they do tend to work out a little bit cheaper, hectograph paper, if you consider how much use you're going to get out of it. Another pro with hectograph paper is you don't need any expensive software to print out your stencil. All you need is your basic printer just to get your design, like I printed this one out. And then once you've got that, you can stick it on your hectograph paper, draw around it like I've shown you, get your stencil, stick it on the skin. So there's no expensive software needed, you know, you don't need Photoshop or anything like that. Now, the downside to Hectograph paper, the cons, these negatives are quite big ones as well. So let's say a client has booked this tattoo, just for example, okay? They booked this in, okay? You've drawn it all out, it's took you however long it's took you to do, and then the client comes, as they do, because people do this a lot, and they come, they've not give you any pre-warning or anything like that, and then they say, yeah, I like this, but I want it 3" bigger. So you're like, right, okay, so this is the only stencil I've got, this is the original, this were meant to go straight on the skin, and then they've turned up for the appointment and they've told me they want it 3" bigger. So all I can do now is reprint this original picture 3" bigger and do all the stencil again. And that is a massive downside if you're just using Hectograph paper. Another downside to it is, say the size is right and the client is happy with the size of it, and you put it on, okay, and it's slightly off, it's not right, it's not straight. When the client stood, it's just angled wrong, and you're not happy with it, so you take it off, you remove the stencil from the skin, and you're going to reapply it. Now, when you have placed a stencil on the skin, and you've got your stencil solution, your transfer solution, your stencil stuff, or your electron, or whatever you use, and then it makes contact with this stencil, when you take it off, this stencil will start to bleed, and it will start to smudge, and different parts of it will start, you know, getting bigger. And for something like this, you know, you're not going to get any problems with this. But let's say you've got like a big portrait piece or something like that you've done, and you take that off the skin and you need to reapply it, then that can get really, really messy to the point you might not even be able to use it again. And if you do put it on the skin a second time, you do manage to get it on the skin a second time, it's going to be a lot weaker than it was the first time. So again, that's a negative to Hectograph paper. Another negative to Hectograph paper, if you're just using paper to skin, okay, so you're not using this step, you're not making a trace of it and then stenciling that, but if you're just using this, paper doesn't tend to bend very well around the skin. So this size would be okay, but if you had something quite big and it was going on like the top of an arm or something like that, when you try to bend it round, even putting slits in it, paper is very rigid and it doesn't tend to bend very well. And what that results in is you're getting overlaps on your stencil, you're getting bits that have smudged at the bottom, you're getting bits that have double printed where it's gone down and then pinged up again. So you've like pressed it down again, but it's not gone quite in the same place, and then you take it off and you've got like 2 prints of the stencil. So that's another downside of using Hectograph paper if you're just doing paper to skin. So if you are using Hectograph paper, I'd probably recommend you trace it first, because the tracing paper bends around the skin so much better than paper does. And just going back to the point I was making about having to redo the stencil, I mean, this is a really simple design, but let's say you've spent 40 minutes, an hour doing this big portrait piece. You know, you're picking out all the fine details, the eyes, the eyelashes, the eyelids, and so on, and it's took you an hour to do this portrait piece. And the size is right, the customer's happy with the size, and then you go to put it on, okay, and it's not lined up right, or it's not gone on right, and you're not happy with it, or the client's not happy with where it's placed, and you take that off, and then all this stencil's bled out inside to the point where you can't use it. You've just wasted an hour of your time doing this stencil, and I've been there before, and it can be soul destroying. If you've made this massive stencil and you've got it perfect just how you want it, and then within the space of 10 minutes that stencil is just no good anymore, it needs to be binned. It's a massive negative to solely using Hectograph paper. So just bear that in mind if you are using Hectograph paper and you are putting your stencil on, be sure that stencil is lined up and it's absolutely perfect before you touch it down onto the skin. So there are pros and cons of Hectograph. So let's move on to pros and cons of thermal. Massive plus point to thermal is what I've already just been discussing about this, is the fact that when you've got your design on your computer and the client comes in and they say, oh yeah, I do like it, but I want it bigger or smaller or whatever, you can just go, okay, that's fine. You get on your computer, on your screen, and you just resize it to whatever size you want, print it out, boom, it's done, it's there, it's ready to go. If it goes wrong, like we talked about with this, if this goes wrong, you have to redo the whole thing again. You know, if you've drawn this out, you've scanned it in, you've got a copy of it on your computer, you can print that out as many times as you like, and that's happened to me. You know, it happens, it goes on the skin, it's not right, the client's not happy where it's placed, it's no problem. We'll remove the stencil from the skin, just give me 5 minutes, I'll go and print out another one. And you can print them out all day long, what size you want, and it will save you absolute masses of time. Another big plus point for using thermal paper when you're using Photoshop anyway is the fact that when you've got writing like script and you've got fine script and you've got really small script that people tend to like, going over this script with a pencil, like tracing it on Hectograph paper, can sometimes not be very accurate if it's really small. You know, there's always going to be inconsistencies, whereas if you've got the actual font on your computer screen and you're printing that straight out onto paper, you will get that exact font, that exact copy of how it looks, how it's supposed to be on your thermal paper. So that is another plus as well. And again, because it's on this tracing paper, it folds around the skin very well. So that's another plus point. So cons of thermal paper: it's slightly more expensive than Hectograph paper. I buy it in boxes of 100 sheets from Spirit. This, with VAT in the UK, it costs me around about £35, something like that, £36, and that'll last me probably 4 to 6 weeks, a box of this. So it's, you know, it works out slightly more than Hectograph paper, but not much more. Another negative to it, it's not as strong a stencil as Hectograph paper. You know, if you were to put this on the skin and compare it to something that's been printed out, this the thermal paper would be slightly weaker than this one, but not to the point where you can't tattoo it or anything like that. It's just an observation I've made personally. But yeah, that's if I'm putting them against each other, I'd say the Hectograph stencils are always a bit stronger than the thermal ones. And the final downside of it is if you're using a dot matrix printer and you're scanning designs in and using them with Photoshop, then obviously you need Photoshop, so it can be pretty expensive depending on what package you get. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope it's helped some of you out. Don't forget, if you've liked this video, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel. I've got a new video coming soon. I'll put the link up as soon as it's been uploaded. And it's taken a really in-depth look at thermal paper stencils, a more advanced look, particularly focusing on a portrait stencil and comparing the two for when one's been drawn and scanned into Photoshop as opposed to just applying a filter on top of a photograph. Like I say, it was a really in-depth look, so as soon as that's uploaded, I'll stick a card up for you to click on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers, guys.